Is Cameron Jarrell Newton a Hall of Famer? People are discussing, and we'll do it right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, and we are a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts. You can also follow us over on Spotify and wherever you listen to this show and all of your favorite shows across the Locked On Podcast Network. Be sure to subscribe to the show here on YouTube. If you're watching, please go ahead and do that. If you're not, subscribe anyway. Also, make sure to follow me on Twitter at Julian Council. If you're watching the show right now, you can see it right there at Julian Council on Twitter, because every single Friday throughout the offseason, throughout the season, all the time, unless there's a holiday on a Friday, I answer your weekly Friday mailbag questions here on the show. So either at me at Julian Council or DM me at Julian Council. So I saw this weekend the conversation over on Twitter because it's a constant debate. And for whatever reason, the debate this weekend was about Cam Newton and his Hall of Fame status as the 32-year-old quarterback is a free agent this year after playing a couple games for the Carolina Panthers. The hope, obviously, when he came into Carolina was that he was going to potentially save the season that had been lost thanks to the poor play of Sam Darnold and the poor decision-making from Matt Rule and the Carolina Panthers front office in making that decision to bring over Sam Darnold. You thought possibly it would happen, especially after watching Cam in his first two touches of the season, scoring a touchdown against Arizona Cardinals, one through the air and one through the ground, ending the return, the comeback, the home camming, as they called it, when they played against Ron Rivera in Washington football team, then Washington football team, now Washington Commanders. And Cam was awesome in that game. And I had told you on this podcast, if Cam's going to play like that every week, 3 touchdowns, no turnovers, then he might actually have a great opportunity to come back and be the long-term option for the Carolina Panthers. Unfortunately, that's not how things went. Joe Brady was fired. Cam Newton regressed, and honestly, wasn't his fault. He only had one wide receiver to work with outside of, it was just really DJ Moore. There's no Christian McCaffrey. Robbie Anderson did play better once Cam was here. The defense was still good, but injury after injury to Gilmore and also to Dante Jackson hindered this Panthers team throughout the latter part of the season, and Cam just isn't the same Cam. But that's not the conversation we're wanting to have. The conversation we're wondering right now, as we sit here on March 1st, is Cam Newton a Hall of Famer? I don't know. And I saw a lot of responses to, I think it was Sheena Quick, who covers the Carolina Panthers, her tweet asking whether Cam Newton is a Hall of Famer. Depending where you're from, you might say yes. Like here in Charlotte, you're going to say yes. And depending on how you lean in the city of Atlanta, you might say yes. But if you're a Falcons fan, you're obviously going to say no. They're going to say no in Tampa. They're going to say no in New Orleans. And probably New England are also going to say no. But if you actually look at Cam Newton's resume, I don't think you can flat out just say no chance that Cam Newton's a Hall of Famer. Okay, as we all know, 2015 NFL MVP. The fact that he was able to drag that offense with Ted Ginn Jr. as his top wide receiver, to have Philly Brown, Devin Funchess, Jericho Cotchery, and I guess Greg Olsen really was his best pass catcher that year, to get that offense to be the top offense in the National Football League and to go to the Super Bowl is one of the best achievements that we've seen from any quarterback over the last 10, 20 years in the National Football League. Tom Brady always elevated the talent around him, but the talent was not as bad as it was that year in Carolina for Cam Newton to be the MVP. We know he's also the Offensive Player of the Year in 2015, Offensive Rookie Year in 2011. He was a first-team All-Pro in 2015, 3-time Pro Bowler in 2011, 13, and 15. He was the Pro Football Writers Association All-Rookie Team in 2011. So Cam did it all when it came to that portion of his career here in Carolina. But you can't just stop there, because typically when we look at Hall of Fame candidacy, we look at their All-Pro teams, if they're an MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, whatever it kind of looks at, and also they're a Pro Bowl. 3 times in a Pro Bowl, 1 time All-Pro, 1 time MVP. So on that, you would think that's probably not enough to get Cam Newton into the Hall of Fame. But you have to take into consideration the context of who he took to the Super Bowl that year in 2015 and what was around him. And you go back to his year in college at Auburn, he didn't have any NFL players on that offense, and he won the Heisman Trophy, and Auburn went undefeated that season. But it's his awards and his accomplishments that really stand out. And you go to his wiki page, I don't think there's, other than Tom Brady and maybe someone of that ilk, you're not going to find the amount of first in NFL history. Cam Newton has the most rushing touchdowns by any quarterback in NFL history. Most passing yards by a quarterback in his first 2 games in NFL history. Most games in NFL history with passing touchdown and rushing touchdown. He's the first player in NFL history with 50 passing touchdowns and 25 rushing touchdowns in his first 3 seasons. First player in NFL history with 4,000 plus passing yards and 10 plus rushing touchdowns in a season. He's the first to do so many things. It's not just the accolades and the achievements and the records. It's also the fact that Cam was able to revolutionize the position. You go back to Mike Vick when he came into the league and played for the Falcons and how he changed the dynamic of how the quarterback position was played with his legs and his arm strength. And Cam, with his physical presence at 6'5", 250, whatever the hell he was and is, he changed the way you look at a quarterback. Nowadays, everybody wants to have a quarterback who's like Cam. You look like Josh Allen. You look at the physical abilities of a guy like Deshaun Watson. While he not be that size and stature, you need to have someone who has a big arm, but also is able to move out of the pocket. And Cam really changed the way teams try to approach finding their quarterbacks. You can't just have a pocket passer like a Tom Brady. Yes, Tom Brady's the GOAT, but nowadays it's going to be really hard to have success in this league if you don't have a quarterback who's mobile enough. Patrick Mahomes. Cam changed the way the game is played at that position. And I always think about what Adam Lefkoe, formerly of Bleacher Report, now works for TNT, covers the NBA, used to cover the NFL. He always talked about when having the conversation about a Hall of Fame candidacy for a player in the National Football League, can you tell the story of football without that player? I don't think you can tell the story of the National Football League, especially the last 10 years, without mentioning Cam Newton and how he helped change the position in the National Football League to where at this point in time in 2022, you're wanting a player like that. And you look at this draft, there's probably not really a player who matches that. Maybe Malik Willis with his arm strength and his athleticism, but that is basically the standard of what you want a quarterback to look like now in a National Football League. Might not be the size and stature, but the way Cam played, that's what you're looking for. So is he a Hall of Famer? I don't know. I don't typically get too caught up on these things. Obviously, one day he'll be about part of the Carolina Panthers Hall of Honor. We can have a conversation, I guess, if you want to say if he gets a statue outside the stadium, even though I don't think that's really necessary. We did just have to take one down not too long ago. We don't want to run into another one of those situations. Not to say that Cam's ever going to have anything that arises in his personal life that forces the Panthers to remove him from the stadium, and if they ever want to enshrine him in that manner. But he's a Carolina Panther great. We know that. The greatest quarterback we've ever had, the only franchise quarterback that we've ever had in Carolina. The only thing, if you're looking at with Cam, that might prevent him, and I think it's probably the biggest thing, is the injuries towards the last part of his career here, if he continues to play, whether he does or not, the injuries that limited him over the last couple seasons, that kind of shortened his prime. Had his prime been able to stay healthy there in 2018 and get the Panthers to the playoffs when they started off 6-2, had he not sustained that foot injury in New England in week 3 of the preseason, and had he been healthy during that 2019 season, maybe the Panthers are a playoff team that year. If he's able to do that, then it's no question. But unfortunately right now there is a question just based off of the longevity of what his prime was and how quickly he rose, and unfortunately how swiftly in a way he fell while being a quarterback here for the Carolina Panthers in the National Football League, going to New England, having an okay season, and coming here after being cut and getting 2 really great weeks, but after that, just not a lot of great football. But I love Cam. I hope that one day he's a Hall of Famer. I would imagine right now the voters are going to say no, but maybe it's another opportunity with an organization here this offseason, and maybe it's still here in Carolina. There's a redemption story still left to be written here for Cam Newton and his chapter with the Carolina Panthers. So we'll see how that works out. We'll also see how free agency and the draft works out. Daniel Jeremiah was on Rich Eisen Show, one of my favorite shows to listen to and watch throughout the weekday there on, I think it's on Peacock. Rich does a great job, and he had Daniel Jeremiah hinting at what he thinks the Carolina Panthers are going to do. We talked about his draft 2.0 last week. We'll get into more of his comments that he had with Rich and with Peter King of Football Morning America on NBC Sports here in just a moment. Football might be over for the season, but basketball is in full steam for both pro and college troops. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance props to where the next fired coach is going to land, BetOnline.net is the number one spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC odds. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. As y'all know, Daniel Jeremiah is one of the best to do it when it comes to breaking down the NFL draft and just breaking down football in general. Former App State quarterback, now at the NFL Network, does a fantastic job. And he was on with Peter King for Football Morning America on Monday. He was also on the Rich Eisen Show over on Peacock and I think on NBC Sports Audio, just talking about his latest mock draft 2.0, which we brought up last week as he had the Carolina Panthers taking Trevor Penning, the left tackle out of Northern Iowa, an FCS school in the Missouri Valley, instead of taking Charles Cross, who has been, I think, probably the most mocked player to the Carolina Panthers. And it's important to recognize that mock drafts before free agency, which starts here in about 12 days, are really meaningless, honestly. It's a fun exercise. It's also kind of a useless exercise. And yes, some of it's source information on what the teams are thinking and where they might go and what kind of positions that they're going to value, which are fairly obvious right now. But once those holes get filled, which I've said in the past that I would far more prefer the Carolina Panthers to get their tackle and get their safety, get their linebacker, if they want to get a quarterback, get that in free agency prior to instead of waiting until the draft at the end of April. So Daniel Jeremiah, who was on with Rich Eisen, was just going through his mock draft, and he was asked about Carolina, and he said that the Panthers, from someone he's talked to, a source who is pretty plugged in with Carolina, is that they are dead set on drafting an offensive lineman at 6, even if it's a reach, which makes sense considering how he mocked Trevor Penning to Carolina. He does not feel very highly of Charles Cross out of Mississippi State, much like Todd McShay of ESPN. He feels the same way, where I think McShay, the last time he had a mock draft, he had mock Sauce Gardner, the corner out of Cincinnati, which that was the first one that when Daniel Jeremiah did his 1.0, he also mocked Sauce Gardner, the corner out of Cincinnati, to the Carolina Panthers, going best player available and also potentially a need. And we've talked about that need and why it might not be as crazy as it looked based off of what happens with but with Dante Jackson and with Stephon Gilmore. So it's not crazy, but we all know the need for the Carolina Panthers is an offensive lineman. It's good to hear that they said that at 6, we're going to get our offensive tackle, especially, or offensive lineman. We're not going to worry about any other position group as of right now, even if we're reaching. Yes, the Panthers want to go best player available, but Scott Fitter has also said that at that position in the draft, that's when you can get aggressive in trying to get a quarterback. Why can't it be the same case when trying to get an offensive lineman, especially if you think that's going to be a long-term option for the Carolina Panthers? And speaking of long-term options, I'm going to get into my offseason to-do list for the Carolina Panthers here very shortly. And he also spoke to Peter King of Football Morning America on NBC. Comes out every Monday morning throughout the year. I think he kind of takes a little bit of time off throughout the summer, but still, when asked about the quarterbacks, yeah, that's the question. If they're not going to take a quarterback at 6, what are you going to? They're going to take an offensive tackle. What happens with the Carolina Panthers? But looking at the quarterback, just draft class, and Jeremiah mentioned this multiple times, and Rich Eisen just talking about how it was a pretty weak class. He said, I might be a little bit more cautious this year when taking a quarterback because it's not a star-studded class. He says he thinks Kenny Pickett out of Pittsburgh is ready to come in and play right away. He could be a solid player and a good, solid starter. He's compared him to a more athletic version of Matthew Hasselbeck. If you think back to Seattle when Matt Hasselbeck was there, they did go to a Super Bowl before losing to Big Ben, and I think it was Jerome Bettis to bust his final game in his hometown of Detroit when they won a Super Bowl there. Ben Roethlisberger, Hall of Famer. Matt Hasselbeck, really good on TV, was good in the NFL, but the teams really want a more athletic version of Matt Hasselbeck. He also went on to say that Malik Willis is more of an ultimate wild card to him. What you get from him now is not what you're going to get from him in 2 to 3 years down the road. It could be a huge payoff, but again, there's a risk associated with that. Hearing that in hearing what he said, I'm relieved that the Panthers, at least as of right now, that's the plan, that they are dead set on taking an offensive lineman, preferably a tackle, at 6th overall in the draft. That's what they need to do. It's been since 2008 when they traded up to get Jeff Otah, since they've drafted a tackle or just drafted an offensive lineman in the first round. And yeah, there was another quote from that article, Peter King, about how you don't have to spend all your draft capital on getting a first round offensive lineman, how teams over the last couple of years in the Super Bowl have not had that. I think they've only had like 3 offensive linemen, whatever it is, that were first round picks. Well, the Panthers need to be trying to get someone who they can put at that position, especially at left tackle, for the next 10 plus years, in the same way when they drafted Jordan Gross, how that worked out for them. It's been a constant revolving door at that position, and the Panthers need to figure it out. What that also tells me, hearing that they're dead set on taking an offensive lineman at that spot, is that what we already knew. They're going to be very aggressive in trying to find a quarterback via free agency or via trade. And this week with the combine going down in Indy, that would make a lot of sense that the Panthers would be trying to find the framework of a deal this week. Even though I've said this before, the focus, like what Jeremiah said, should be building the offensive line, and not just building an offensive line, but building the best overall roster for whoever's going to be the quarterback this year, who should be Sam Darnold. I get it. He's not good. I've never been a believer in Sam Darnold. Daniel Jeremiah still believes that Sam Darnold has something in there inside of him that can help him be good in the NFL. I don't think it's ever going to happen. He said maybe he's a slave to his draft grade coming out of USC, that he still believes in Darnold. But I've seen enough over 4 years, especially here in Carolina, to know that Sam Darnold's not the answer long-term. But the answer long-term is not out there. I don't see Russell Wilson leaving. I don't see Aaron Rodgers leaving. And we'll see what happens with Deshaun Watson. Maybe that works out. But if it's not going to be really Deshaun, then what's the point? Yes, bring in competition for Sam Darnold. You can't just roll him out there and not have any competition, like they should have done this past season, where he had no competition at all. They should have given him someone to compete with, because maybe that pushes him forward to be better. But also, you just can't hand the keys to a player who has not played well throughout his 4 seasons or his 3 prior seasons in the National Football League. So them being dead set on offensive lineman absolutely tells me that they are going to turn every stone over to find a quarterback. We already knew that when Peter Schrager talked about how he had a conversation with David Tepper at the Super Bowl, and Tepper talking about how they want to be aggressive, and the aggressiveness is what landed the Carolina Panthers in this position that they're in right now with Sam Darnold and having that prohibitive $18.858 million cap hit. It's not just Darnold. It's also looking at Robbie Anderson, $16 million cap hit this upcoming season, $34 million cap hit on 2 players who honestly should not be on the Carolina Panthers roster in 2022, but that's where they land. So at the very least, after, for whatever reason, re-signing Ian Thomas, the Carolina Panthers have their minds set on getting an offensive lineman at 6, at least for now. What else should they be looking to do this offseason? I have my offseason to-do list of what I think the Carolina Panthers need to do here over the next couple weeks to ensure that once we head into mandatory minicamp and then later on in August down in Spartanburg, that this team is actually in position to be a competitor here in the NFC South in 2022. We'll get into all that here in just a moment. This episode of Locked On Panthers is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computers, choosing the only brand or warehouse happens to carry? You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. I'm talking about your smartphone, folks. Same time and money when using Rock Auto. Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Rock Auto prices are reliably low for every customer. They have everything you can need, from brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. Go explore their easy-to-use website today to find a solution to your auto parts needs. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box to know we sent you? Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. As we know, the Carolina Panthers have a laundry list of needs heading into this free agency period coming up here in a couple weeks, and they got to check a lot of boxes if they want to have that bounce back year 3 for Matt Rule. Typically, as we know, they struggle year 1 under Matt Rule when he was back at Baylor and Temple. And in year 2, you see that progress. And record-wise, well, we didn't see it. And the decision to bring Sam Darnold in here certainly played a role. The lack of attention paid to the offensive line and the moves, bringing Cam Irving and Pat Elflein in the first few minutes of the legal tampering period last year were poor decisions. But we did see the development over the last couple of years of guys like Jeremy Chin, Brian Burns. Derek Brown came on later on in the season. Same thing with Etor Gross-Matos. And the defense overall was one of the best in the National Football League after being a unit that could not get off the field and that struggled in 2020 in the first year of Matt Rule. Special teams, while coverage was not great and return game wasn't great, the kicking game, when Zane Gonzalez was healthy, had gotten better. And Lachlan Edwards did a fine job as a punter, even though the special teams efficiency numbers still wouldn't point to the Carolina Panthers being one of the better units in the National Football League. You did see some level of progress, at least from the place kicking game for the Carolina Panthers, but not enough to change the win-loss record from the year prior in 2020, where they went 5-11, and they finished off 5-12, losing their final 7 games in 2021. So the Panthers obviously need to change things, need to improve this roster if they want to have any chance at winning the NFC South. And, well, Matt Rule wants to, coach here in 2023 and keep his job in residence here in Charlotte, North Carolina. So I have an off-season to-do list, and it's a work in progress list, and there would be things I'm going to add throughout the upcoming weeks for what they need to do. But first off, we already talked about it. We know they went out there and they rebuilt the staff. Matt Rule now has 3 former coaches, or now 3 coaches on his staff who used to be former head coaches in the National Football League. Still Steve Wilkes making a homecoming here in Carolina. Ben McAdoo, not the greatest of hires, but still he has the experience and he fits the system that Matt Rule probably wants to run. And also have the Tom Coughlin connection, and then Paul Pasqualoni, who's one of the oldest men in football and has forgotten more than you and I and probably Matt Rule will ever know about the game of football throughout his career working in college and the NFL. So the staff hires, I like those a lot. The Carolina Panthers currently only have about $12 million to work with when it comes to the NFL salary cap. That means they need to restructure some deals. Last year, they did that with Shaq Thompson, with Christian McCaffrey. They also did it with Matt Paradis, who's now a free agent and likely on his way out of Carolina. They need to find a way to do that again because they have some players that they need to be able to re-sign, and they don't have enough space to do that. Yes, they can push that money down the road. Maybe they try to restructure again with McCaffrey, who's entering the first year of his 4-year, $64 million extended paid running back. And I know football, we would love to see him play, considering he's missed the vast majority of games over the last 2 seasons since Matt Rule got here to Carolina. And we'll see what his role is in Carolina, potentially if they want to trade him. I just don't know what team out there would want to do that, considering McCaffrey hasn't been healthy, and he's the highest paid running back in the National Football League. And as I've said to y'all plenty of times, all running backs in the NFL should be making federal minimum wage. So restructure deals is the first thing the Carolina Panthers need to do. One of the other things I think the Panthers need to do in terms of their to-do list is extend DJ Moore. They've already picked up the 5th-year option last season. That's going to have him making $11 million this year with an $11.1 million cap hit, which is pretty cheap considering that the last 3 seasons he's had over 1,000 yards receiving with the likes of broken Cam Newton, Sam Darnold, P.J. Walker, Teddy Bridgewater, Kyle Allen, Will Grier. Those are his quarterbacks, and he's able to put up big numbers every single year. You'll wonder what he'd look like if he finally got a quarterback. Extending DJ Moore is going to be one of the top priorities for the Carolina Panthers. I don't have to worry about the money this season, but moving forward next season, 2023, that's when you got to worry about maybe how that factors in. And also, you're going to exercise the 5th-year option for Brian Burns. Will kick in for the 2023 season. That's a no-brainer decision. Brian Burns is finally a Pro Bowler this past year. And looking at the DJ Moore extension, too, what complicates it, and Scott Fitters talked about this when he was asked about can they fit in Stephon Gilmore and Dante Jackson into the salary cap? Can you bring back both those players? And he said that we have a plan. I wonder how that plan is going to be utilized, knowing that they whiffed on Sam Darnold. Because when they brought in Sam Darnold and they signed, or they didn't sign him, but they exercised his 5th-year option, they looked at it as, all right, we got a quarterback for 2 years, $22 million, basically $11 million per season. Now, it was 4 last year. It's 18 this year. And it's, again, pretty prohibitive. This season, they knew going into this year that they're going to have to work around that. But I also think that they expected that they would have the answer at the position, and that Darnold was going to play a lot better than he played in 2021. Why they expected that, I don't know. If they watch the film, they'd clearly see a player who's not very good. But that's the case. And since Darnold did not play well, and Spitter's already said it's got to be creative, it really kind of muddies the plan of what they wanted to do, where you want to extend guys like DJ Moore. you're going to want to extend a player eventually like Brian Burns. You're going to pick up his 5th-year option. But when you don't have a quarterback contract in place, it's hard to do that. Now, maybe they draft a rookie quarterback and that figure things out for them where, okay, we got the rookie contract we can figure that out, and we got plenty of space to be able to sign all these other players. But when you're sitting here in quarterback limbo, that can make things difficult when trying to execute the plan that Scott Fitterer says the Carolina Panthers have. I try to trust in Scott Fitterer. I want to believe in him. I think for the most part we should. Yes, he had a role in the Sam Darnold decision, but that's the position his owner put him in. Also, something the Carolina Panthers need to do is bring in legitimate competition for Sam Darnold. Again, I don't think any of the top guys are going to be coming here. And I don't love either the rookies. And Daniel Jeremiah, who knows this better than me, says not a starting class. Maybe in 2-3 years, you've got a really good player in Malik Willis, but it's a risk. Are you willing to take a risk on one of these quarterbacks when I think Jeremiah's top quarterback is Kenny Pickett, and his top 50 big board, he's like ranked 28th. So he's not even a top 10 player. Are you willing to risk or take a risk on one of those guys, on a player of that caliber? I don't think the Carolina Panthers should. So if they're going to bring in legitimate competition, Carson Wentz, he's been better than Sam Darnold. They've given up on him in Indianapolis, but we know he's a decent starter in the NFL, and he's helped teams get to the playoffs before, and he positioned the Eagles to be the number 1 seed a few seasons ago when they went on to win the Super Bowl with Nick Foles. You got to bring him in if you can. Obviously, you're not going to trade for him if he's going to be cut, what Chris Mortensen said from ESPN.com, then you got to go ahead and bring him in. Don't trade for Gardner Minshew. I get it. He's probably better than Sam Darnold, maybe, but he's not a long-term option. Don't give up assets for him. Unless you can give up one in 2023 or 2024, then maybe do that. But they got to bring in some sort of competition for Sam Darnold, preferably free agent competition that does not give up any sort of assets. You got to try to re-sign Hassan Reddick. Also got to try to re-sign either Stephon Gilmore or Dante Jackson. I don't think both are going to re-sign. They got to try and re-sign one of those guys. In order to do that, you're very likely going to need to cut AJ Bouye to save $3.5 million against the salary cap this season. We already talked about the restructuring deals. There can be some salary cap casualties, and Bouye makes sense to be that guy who gets cut because he plays that position. He already traded for CJ Henderson. You drafted last season J.C. Horn. You also drafted Keith Taylor, who they seem to like. If you can bring back one of those veteran guys and Gilmore or Dante Jackson, you got to feel pretty good about that foursome right there playing corner for the Carolina Panthers. And then these are the obvious ones. Sign or draft a long-term left tackle option. As I've told y'all, my preference is to get one in free agency who's a veteran. Sign or draft a long-term option at center. Probably via the draft makes the most sense. And then sign a free agent guard. They got to be able to find 3 new starters on the offensive line. They also need to find a new starter at middle linebacker next to Shaq Thompson, Jermaine Carter Jr., who started last season after the Carolina Panthers decided to move off of Denzel Perryman, who went on to be a Pro Bowler with the Las Vegas Raiders. He did not live up to the faith that Matt Rule had placed in him going to the season, which, surprise, surprise, he still had a decent career in Carolina. But he's on to hopefully better things for him because he's just not a starting caliber middle linebacker in a National Football League right now. He can be a good rotational player, but he's not fit where, well, at least to the level the Carolina Panthers need at that position next to Shaq Thompson. So finding someone who can fit into that place would be great. And they did it last year. The problem was Perryman just didn't necessarily fit whatever culture they're trying to establish here, and also was injured throughout training camp. And, Carter, I guess, won the job according to the staff. They also need to find a free safety. This time last year, we spoke a lot about Richie Grant, the safety coming out of UCF, who was on the Carolina Panthers Senior Bowl squad down there in Mobile a year ago. He ended up being a Falcon, unfortunately, and the Carolina Panthers were not able to grab him. Not sure where he landed on their board there in the second round, but finding a free safety. And I said this last week when I think it was Cat Crave on Twitter was talking about Kyle Hamilton or something like that. It's like, I would love for the Carolina Panthers to be in position where they've already acquired they got Hassan Reddick back. They have the corners back. They have acquired 3 starters on the offensive line. They have their middle linebacker, whatever. And if they're in position to take Kyle Hamilton from Notre Dame, because that would be awesome to have him. I just don't know if they're going to be in position to do that, but they need to find one either through the draft or free agency. And I think very likely is going to be via the draft. And they also need to find, as Scott Fitterer brought this up, they got to find someone who's around 285, who can be 285 pounds, who can be on the defensive end and set the edge defensively to stop the run game. Because as good as the Panthers were at coming out the edge and getting out the quarterback, they have been really poor over the last couple seasons, dating back to even the last time Rivera was here, especially since they've been in this primary odd man, 3-man front. Now with Phil Snow as their defensive coordinator, they got to find someone who can set the edge and they can stop the run, because they have not done that. They get after the passer, but they cannot stop the run game, and that's something that's killing them. And a lot of teams that like to do that wide zone last year really killed the Carolina Panthers. So hopefully they can find a player who can help set the edge and can help improve the run game for the Carolina Panthers. So that's just the to-do list for now. Certainly we'll see how things play over the next couple of days, where I will add to that. If y'all want to add to it, please feel free to let me know what you think the Carolina Panthers need to do this upcoming offseason, as it is do or die here in Carolina for Matt Rule. That's going to do it here for this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, again, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Be sure to subscribe to the show here on YouTube. You can also listen to the show on Apple Podcasts, where I ask you to please rate, review, and subscribe there. 5 stars only. Don't be a hater. And also, you can follow the show on Spotify and wherever you listen to this show at your favorite podcasting platform. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter at Julian Council, because every single Friday I answer your weekly Friday mailbag questions here on the show. So either at me or DM me at Julian Council for whatever questions that you have as they pertain, to your Carolina Panthers. In the meantime, be safe. I don't really need to tell you to stay warm anymore, because it looks like we're kind of back in the 70s here in Charlotte. But wherever you are, be safe, stay warm, and keep pounding. And I'll talk to y'all on Wednesday.